Hello and welcome to the June 2020, June 2021 edition of Logic Apps Live. Thank you for coming. We have some really cool stuff to show you, both covering what has been happening and what is coming, as well as some demos that we have prepared. Then we'll do Q&A live, so make sure to send your questions to the chat window and we'll get to those towards the end of the show. And without further ado, let's switch to this view so you can see the whole team here who is here with me. I have John, Chris, Parth, and Eddie. So everyone say hi, and I will hand it to John to talk to all the features that we have been working on. And we'll start with what's new.
Great. Thank you. Yeah, what's new? Well, a lot is new since we last met. Probably the two really big things that we have announced and released in the last month or so is Logic Apps Standard. So this is the single tenant offering for Logic Apps that runs on top of the functions runtime that many of you are familiar with, and we've now released it to be generally available, so fully supported in production environments, and giving you all of the great capabilities that you've been trying out, hopefully in preview. You can now push that to production. The second big thing that we have announced in public preview is Logic Apps on Azure Arc. Now, this is part of a broader set of services that we brought to Arc called application services. So this is functions, event grid, Logic Apps, and API management and functions. So, you know, these four things together give you, API gateways, these four things together give you great set of application development capabilities that you are now also able to deploy into your Kubernetes environments wherever they run. The next thing, just kind of walking through, is Azurite. So we released a new version with the Azurite team of the storage emulator. The great thing about Azurite is the fact it's multi-platform. So you can now do local development, fully local, no longer just on Windows, but you can do it on Mac and Linux as well. Another great new feature is the Debug Mode, so you can see the run history for stateless workflows, which obviously is new in Logic App Standard. So, you know, it's a handy addition. Parameterization, this has been a big one that a lot of you have asked for in terms of how can I just make it easier to kind of manage the settings that I may have on each Logic app across different environments. So being able to parameterize now available in standard Logic apps is a lot easier now that we have this capability, and it'll even support complex JSON objects that you can kind of access as part of the configuration when you kind of deploy those Logic apps through. And then the final one is the command line interface. So new set of gestures on the CLI for Logic App Standard. Basically, AZ Logic App, you can now kind of create, configure, deploy, and do all the management tasks on the command line for Logic App Standard as well. And just one thing, just looping back before we move to the next slide around Logic App Standard. The thing you'll notice is that we released something called Workflow Standard Plan. So this is essentially a new set of SKUs for the compute for Logic App Standard that allows you to set up the size of essentially the Logic app that you're going to add workflows to, and kind of scale up and down according to the rules that you set. So loads of control, loads of great new features. And then what's coming? Well, you know, more parameters support. Today, we don't have the support in the designer, so that's coming very soon. And being able to edit those, and also having token picker support for that as well. New designer for consumption. So as you'll be aware, we now currently right now have two designers, one that loads for consumption Logic apps, you know, the original version that's been around for a few years, and the new designer for standard. And a lot of you again asked, like, when are we going to see the new designer for consumption? That is coming really soon. So you'll soon find that when you load your Logic apps, regardless of whether they're consumption or standard, are going to load in the new designer. And then also the ability to something called Combine Create. So essentially optimizing the creation of resources that you're using in your Logic apps as well as part of that. I don't know whether you want to add anything more on that one, actually, Derek.
Yeah, I mean, so designer for consumption, definitely, I think people have been pinging me a lot on when they will be able to get access to it. So it's definitely coming soon. We're keeping an eye on making sure we fill all the gaps between what we support in standard and what we have been supporting for the last 5 years in consumption. So that took us a little bit longer to make sure we have a good support, but it is coming very soon. And my ask to you is, once you see the new designer showing up on consumptions, definitely give it a try and let us know your feedback. If it's a suggestion, feedback, if you see any bugs, definitely do let us know so we can keep making it better.
All right, run trigger with payload is another super useful feature of being able to essentially provide the payload on the request trigger from the Azure portal. So, we've always had this kind of run now thing, but now you'll actually be able to provide the payload to run the logic app as well, which is going to make testing a lot easier to do from the Azure portal. More built-in connectors. This is one where we would love to kind of hear from you, which ones that you need next. We're kind of working through the list that we already got, and it'd be great if you can tell us the built-in connectors that you need as well. I think the ones that are particularly interesting that people have asked for already are things like SEP, file, and FTP. Basically, a lot of that driven from being able to deploy logic apps to local environments and other contexts, and sort of having access to local resources kind of makes sense. More CLI operations also on the way for things like the connection operations to manage those. And then tasks. So more templates for tasks. And also a template generation UI. And at this point, I'm going to hand you over to Parth, who's going to show a demo of this.
Hello and good morning. Let's walk through the process of how we can upload an automation task template. Essentially, you have a logic app here, what it does is that whenever a new message arrives in Service Bus, it creates a new blob in storage account. I have a couple of successful runs for it. And also I'm using this private link, which I'll also link in the description, which has the export to automation task UI, which you'll soon see. So let's go to the designer. Here's the logic app. So what we want to do firstly is to configure some parameters here. So I've already created two parameters, which is the container name and the queue name, which will be the user inputs for the automation task template. Once I've done those, I can go to the overview blade and export this logic app to an automation task. Make sure that this is a consumption logic app because that is what is supported currently for automation tasks. Let's go ahead and fill these things out. So I've already filled out some important fields here, like the name and description, but what you need to keep in mind is the supported resource type. So this is where the task template will be displayed on. Tasks only supports first-class Azure resources for now, so make sure this is a first-class Azure resource, which is namespaces in our case. You can leave the unsupported resource type blank for now. And when you configure a parameter, you can also specify if and how the user should interact with those parameters. So for example, for a container name, you can say that it is user provided and specify the important details. Similar for queue name. But let's say if you had a parameter that was supposed to be fetched from the resource and you don't want the user to provide it, you can also do so from here. So for example, a collection ID or a database ID can simply be fetched from here as a resource ID, given if it were a parameter. But let's say this is the user provided field for now. And let's go ahead and download this template. Now that we've downloaded the JSON file, which will basically act as your automation task template, you would want to make sure that you test this and then submit a successful PR. So this is the main repository which hosts all the templates that we have today. In order for you to easily test this, what you would do is fork this main repository, create a new branch in that forked repository, and push your newly downloaded template. And then from there on, you can test it using a tool like Fiddler. So let's see what I've already done. I have already forked this main repository, as you can see over here. Then in this new branch, new service bus template branch, I have the templates where I have added this newly created JSON file, which we downloaded, and also made sure to add this newly created JSON file to the manifest.json. So from here on, what we would only need to do is testing in Fiddler. So let's do that. I'm using Fiddler 4 for testing here, and the main thing that you need to know is that a part of the code in the method onBeforeRequest will have to be replaced with the code that I'll make sure to provide in the link. But what that piece of code does is that it gets the manifest JSON and the template file from your fork repository instead of the actual automation task main repository. So with that being said, let's go ahead and test this in browser. Let's make sure all your browser windows are closed and also like you've cleared the cache in Fiddler. So open a new browser window here and I've navigated to Portal. And if you remember, we wanted to test this template on the service bus namespace level. So let's go ahead and check out a service bus and go to tasks. Let's start capturing to make sure that we monitor whatever comes about. And as you can see, the new template is actually popped up. So what you need to do is just go about filling this whole process as you would do in any task create experience, add your container name and the queue. And when you create, all you need to do is just to make sure that this behaves according to the configuration you wanted it to. So thank you so much for watching this. And I will also make sure to include a link with the survey for you to enter what are some task templates that you would like to see, and also all the resources I used in this video. Thank you.
All right, so that is automation task and how you can create and upload template that you have been working on. I think Parth will send a link into the chat window for you to try out the new Azure portal experience with the template UI that you just seen in the demo. So definitely give that a try. We have a second demo for you today during Logic App Live. This one is also recorded, but from back to show the usage of SQL Server as a storage provider for Logic Apps. Now we recorded this because it's 2:30 a.m. for back right now in Australia, but I hope you like the content, and we'll also include a link on how you can sign up for the private preview for SQL Storage Provider if you want to give this a try. So let's roll the tape.
Awesome, thanks. So I'm going to walk through the private preview functionality of using SQL as your backend for Azure Logic Apps. Now, if you've used the standard Logic App runtime, you might already be familiar with storing all your state, your workflows and execution run history in Azure Storage. But what happens if you want to run your Logic Apps off Azure? Well, this is where the SQL provider comes into play. With the SQL alternative, you can now run SQL instances wherever you want to run your Logic Apps and use that as your backend state store for all of your Logic Apps. And this will work across all the environments that you want to run your Logic Apps in, even Azure if you so choose to. Now, this isn't a replacement of Azure Storage altogether. It's simply an alternative option so that if you need control in terms of where you run your Logic Apps and how much performance and throughput you need, it's a great option for that. So if you want to sign up for the private preview and get your hands dirty with this particular feature, you can sign up at aka.ms/logicappssql, and we look forward to seeing you there. But for now, let's dive into a quick sneak peek of what you can expect from the private preview. Now, this demo isn't going to be too flashy because essentially it's the exact same Logic App standard experience you might know and love. The only difference is where your state is going to be run. So locally, I can choose to run my state in SQL Express if I want to try out the functionality there. So in this case, I've developed my workflow, and all I need to do is just input a new line in my local settings, which will actually point it to my SQL environment. In this case, for my local environment, I'm using my SQL Express environment. So as you can see, this is just the connection string I've got from that. I'm just using the default database there. So I actually have this running at the moment. So if we go to our overview page, we can run this a couple of times. It all smells the same. As you can see, it's running extremely quickly, under 1 second. And if I go to my SQL Management Studio, I can see that all of my databases and the backend state and store are all stored in SQL tables. Now, you don't have to worry about this. This is to an extent extracted away from you, but this is exactly the same as would be stored if you were to go into Azure Storage today. Okay, so now I've gone and tested this out. I know it's working, and now I want to go deploy it to my production environment, wherever that might be. In this case, I would go and change the connection string to my actual production SQL environment, so it's pointing to the correct one, which I'm going to do off camera. And then I can use the Visual Studio deployment action to go and deploy my logic app to that environment. I can either create a new logic app and pass through the settings via that process, or I can deploy it to one I've already created earlier. Now, I just so happen to have created one just before this, so I'm just going to deploy my changes to this logic app, which is already set up to my production SQL environment. So I'm going to go ahead and deploy that, give it a couple of minutes, and then flick across to it in Azure to see it all running live. Okay, so this is the SQL database that I've used for the backend of this particular demo. It's just running on Azure SQL PaaS just because it's really easy for me to spin up, but you could be running SQL in a number of different form factors if you so choose. SQL in containers, SQL in a VM, wherever your SQL is, as long as you can paste in your connection string, you can use that as your backend storage state for logic apps. So let's go dive into that logic app that we deployed to earlier. Now, as I mentioned before, this is not going to be a flashy demo because it's exactly the same experience as you would have if you were using Azure Storage as a backend, but now all of my state is now running in that new SQL database. So if I go ahead and run this trigger, that's going to go ahead and run. Everything will work as before, as expected. But now if we go back to that SQL Management Studio, I can see that all of my state, if I go and minimize this one, is now all in that particular SQL database for me to go in and manage, backup, secure all the things that I can do with SQL, I can now apply to my backend store for my logic app. So it's just an example of providing more flexibility for you to be able to run logic apps anywhere and have the control to be able to store your state wherever you go. So back to you.
All right, so that is a quick demo on using SQL as storage provider for logic apps. Again, we're accepting signups for the private preview, and here's the link. But there are a couple of ways you can get involved. BizTalk Live, we're resuming doing that. So it's scheduled for next Wednesday, June the 30th at 10:30 a.m. Pacific time. So we'll be posting that to our Twitter page. We'll also get a schedule up on YouTube. So definitely keep an eye out for that if you're interested in learning more about BizTalk Migrator. Like Beck mentioned, remember to sign up for the SQL Storage Provider private preview if you're interested in that. Here's the link, aka.ms/logicappssql. And like Parth have mentioned in his demo, we would like you to help us complete a survey so we can learn more about what you want us to focus on when it comes to automation tasks. So aka.ms/automation tasks is the link. Obviously, get in touch. We are pretty active on Twitter at LogicAppsIO. You are here on our YouTube page already, so feel free to browse our video collections after the webcast. And if you have any questions that you just want to get a hold of us, feel free to send us an email as well at logicappsemail@microsoft.com. So with that said, let's go to Q&A. So you see the chat window somewhere here in your window. Make sure to post your questions there and we'll get to them. All right, I think we have the first question. Hi guys, I'm using Logic App. After some time, I observed there are two kinds of Logic App now. One being standard and another being consumption. What is the difference between them? Anyone want to take it? I think John is trying to find the unmute button.
Yeah, I'll take it. I was going to post the doc link as well in the chat. So primary difference is one's multi-tenant, one's single tenant. So what does that mean? Well, essentially for consumption, it's completely pay as you go. You just pay per action. It scales up automatically. You don't see any of the infrastructure at all. You don't care about that. You don't care about where the data's stored, how it's stored, etc. You pick the region, you create a logic app, and just build it out and do whatever it needs to do. With standard, things change a little bit because you get more control over the compute. basically. So you provision a new workflow standard SKU. You choose the kind of number of cores and the amount of memory that it has, and it's kind of pre-configured into different units. And that basically has a fixed price per month, but it's actually metered per hour, I think. And that actually kind of can be much more cost attractive for certain workloads, particularly the ones that use the new built-in actions. So with consumption, you kind of pay per the action execution, which is great when you're getting started. But when you get up into millions of action calls and you start using a lot of connected calls, particularly with things like service bus and event hubs, which we have built-in support for standard, you may find it's actually more cost-effective for you to switch to standard and use that to get very high throughput. And the other kind of side of that is that you don't have, because it's a single tenant service, because it's your compute, you can actually configure and control some of the settings that that you don't have access to in consumption. So things like limits for throughput, which we have in place for multi-tenant because it kind of protects everybody from kind of noisy neighbor issues. But when it's your compute, you can actually change some of those settings. You can change the kind of parallelism on for each and other things, like beyond the maximum limits that you see in consumption. So there's a bunch of interesting things that you can do to kind of improve and optimize for cost and performance in your environments. It can be very attractive from that point of view. As well as that, obviously, there's a whole bunch of other advantages with standard, like the things we were just talking about, the ability to run anywhere, right? So you now have the ability to deploy with Azure Arc. It's containerized, right? So we'll have other options coming, running in AKS, et cetera, as experiences for you to make it very easy to kind of get the benefits of fully serverless with the ease of use and manageability that comes with that, but with the kind of power and control of being able to run in containerized environments, like Kubernetes. So that's really, the primary goals. Obviously, you see things like the designer right now are advantages, I'd say, today for standard, but we are bringing those to consumption. So, but certainly the kind of the mode in which it runs is probably the biggest way to really think about this in terms of how, which one works best for the workloads that you have.
Yeah, the thing I like the most, obviously I use my MacBook a lot of the times, is that with standard Logic App, I can do all my Logic App development locally on a Macintosh, right, in macOS. Especially with Azurite that John, you just mentioned, I can now do everything fully locally without needing internet because the storage emulator runs on Mac now. I don't have to connect to even a cloud storage account, which is really cool. There's so many benefits that you get from developing locally, right? You can do breakpoint debugging to really look into what are all the values that we have stored as states. Obviously, if you use SQL, you can go peek into the SQL table. Remember to sign up for SQL private preview back asked you to. But you can also do that from the debugger, which is awesome. And obviously, doing things locally help you to get into a good place where you can start doing DevOps and CI/CD because everything is file system based. You have the local project that you can put into the repository. You can author or use our template for GitHub Actions and Azure DevOps pipelines, which just make things so much easier if you're building more complex workflows that you want to have a proper management and development experience. All right, let's see. What other questions do we have? We have another one. When the new designer will eventually show up for consumption, will it be available as part of opt-in instead of we'll move it all together? So it's actually a little bit of both. What we are doing right now is to utilize a new framework that has been made available to all the Azure extensions to allow us to flight experiences out in different waves or in different rings. Right? If you are familiar with how Windows does its insider release, you have the insider ring, you have the preview ring, and then you have the production ring, right? So features are rolled out gradually, so we can monitor data to make sure everything works. We catch all the issues, and we can listen to your feedback and have time to incorporate them into our next week of development. So we're doing something very similar Right now, we're rolling to a very small percentage of customers, but we're keeping an eye on the data, we're keeping an eye on the feedback so that we know when can we move forward or when should we wait just a little bit to make sure we capture all the feedback that people have. So if you see the new designer, when you use consumption, don't be alarmed. That is by design. If you do, definitely give it a try and send us any problems that you see. Send us any feedback that you would like us to address. Either send us an email directly, ping us on Twitter, or you can open a GitHub issue on Azure/Logic Apps repository. We have developers monitoring that as well. All right, let's see. I will take the next question, but others feel free to take any if you see anything that you want to answer. One from Peter, an action to generate a PDF document would really be great. And I completely agree. And we actually have quite a few of those. There are many third-party ones that can generate PDFs, but the one that I've personally used is actually from Word Online. So, in Word, you can create a Word document, but make it into a template. And when you make things into template, you can essentially parameterize your Word document to say, oh, I'm creating a template for order invoicing, and the invoice ID is going to be a dynamic value that I don't want to hard code, but I want to provide when I use the template. So you can create such templates, upload it to your OneDrive or OneDrive for Business account, and in Logic Apps, select an action in Word Online to say, generate PDF from that template. And what's cool about this is Logic App understands what are all the parameters that template needs. So it will show it to you in the workflow designer, and you can feed tokens or dynamic content into that parameter. And then boom, you get a PDF file. I covered it a little bit in one of our early Microsoft Mechanics videos where I was showing using Logic Apps to do order processing with SAP and then sending the invoice using this exact connector. So we'll try to find a link and post it to the chat window, but definitely give it a try and let us know what you think. All right.
I'm going to throw a couple of other new things out there that we didn't mention in the What's New that are worth noting and also coming soon. There's a couple of improvements coming to Service Bus and MQ. The Service Bus one, which some of you may have noticed or asked us for, is for peak lock support, and we're bringing that in the next few weeks actually. So probably middle to late July, you'll see that in a release, giving you peak lock support for stateless workflows. We'll be bringing it to stateful as well later in the year, but stateless workflows will be first, giving you peak lock support. And there's also a couple of improvements to the MQ connector as well, I think, Chris, right, that we've got kind of rolling out in a few weeks' time as well. Based on customer feedback again, so these are both built-in connectors. So I just wanted to kind of mention that as well for those of you who've asked us about those in the past.
All right, let's see what other questions do we have. We have one on, is there any content or learning path discussing about the CI/CD feature? Yes, indeed. So we have a Logic App Talk series that we are doing, right? So you are in Logic App Live now, where we stream live this webcast and interact with you in real time, answering questions and talk about new features and what's coming and all that. But we have a Logic App Talk that focus on specific topics per episode. We have done two at this time, I think, one on the new runtime and all the behaviors, really deep diving into it. And then we have another one on DevOps. So let me try to find the link where Beck, who you saw the demo on Sql Storage Provider from, did a deep dive in how you can do CI/CD with Logic Apps. So great content, definitely encourage you to take a look. And here is the link.
Somebody's asked, just while you're pasting that, asked about, hey, I thought I saw the new designer show up in consumption and it disappeared again. To the way Derek was describing the way we're releasing this, is like, yes, we did identify a couple of issues. So we actually pulled it back from the release that some of you may have seen. And it'll, as we mentioned earlier, it will be coming out again soon. So apologies if you saw that. I know you kind of got the sad smiley face. It's like, it's great that you're looking forward to it, but we want to get this right. Obviously, this is a pretty big change for us, which is why we've been releasing it incrementally, and we wanted to get it to you as soon as we possibly can.
Yep. Let's see. Do we have any other questions? Well, I think that's all we have for now. We'll stay here for a minute or two, so make sure if you have any questions, post it here. But I would just ask questions for folks on the call. Anything that you want to mention, that you want to call out and let people know about? Well, I guess that's it. It's getting hot here in Seattle, so it's gonna be what, John, you mentioned 100 and some degrees in the weekend. My room is definitely
106.
heating up now.
Yeah, 106 Fahrenheit on Monday. I think it's going to be here. 41 degrees Celsius, which is hot, right?
Yeah. All right, cool. So we are exactly 30 minutes into our live stream, which I think we covered a good bit of content, and hopefully we answered all your questions. If we missed any, definitely reach out to us and let us know. We'll be more than happy to answer those questions. We'll also scan through the chat in case we missed any. Oh, I just have a last question coming in. When is the next live session scheduled for? Well, we have one next week that will focus on BizTalk Migrator. It's on June the 30th at 10:30 a.m. Pacific time. So 30 minutes after the start time of this one. So definitely check it out. We haven't figured out when will we do the next Logic App Live, but when we do, we'll let you know. So follow us on Twitter at LogicApps.io, where we'll be posting all these type of announcements. So with that said, I want to thank you very much for tuning in. I want to thank the team for coming here with me and present all the great content, and hope you enjoy it, and see you next time.
Thank you.